The air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. Dr. Celine Ariston woke up in a high-tech medical pod, gasping as memories crashed into her mind, memories that were not her own. The gleaming lab around her faded into visions of golden palaces, the salty breeze of the Nile, and the weight of a crown heavier than time itself. She was Cleopatra, the last ruler of Egypt, the queen of the Nile, the one who defied empires and gods alike. And now reborn. The world had changed. It was a land of steel and glass, of men who ruled with numbers instead of swords. But Celine knew Cleopatra had returned for one purpose: to reclaim her throne. Through whispers from ancient texts and cybernetic archives, she pieced together the legend of the Eye of Amun, an artifact buried beneath the sands of Egypt. Said to be a creation of gods or something far older, it held the power to reshape reality itself. If Cleopatra was to rule again, she needed that artifact. But she wasn't the only one looking for it. The Order of Horus, a secretive group of scholars, archaeologists, and modern-day power brokers, had spent decades trying to locate the eye. They believed it was too dangerous for any one person to wield. Cleopatra had no such fears. Accompanied by her loyal confidant, Dr. Lucien Voss, a rogue historian obsessed with uncovering lost truths, Cleopatra set out for Cairo. The desert wind whispered her name as she stepped onto Egyptian soil. Cairo had become a labyrinth of neon and ruins, a mix of forgotten history and unchecked progress. They traveled to the Valley of Kings, where old legends spoke of the Tomb of Shadows, a place untouched by time. Deep beneath the ruins of an ancient temple, Cleopatra felt something stir in her blood. "We're close," she whispered. The Order of Horus was already there, led by Elias Qasim, a man who saw himself as the last guardian of Egypt's hidden past. "You don't belong here," Qasim warned, his rifle aimed at her heart. Cleopatra only smiled. "You don't understand, do you? This is my home. I was buried here before the first stone of your cities was laid." A signal from her, and Lucien activated the explosives. The temple walls trembled, and a hidden passage was revealed beneath the rubble. Before Qasim and his men could react, Cleopatra descended into the darkness. The chamber smelled of old stone and power. Hieroglyphs glowed with an otherworldly light, shifting as if aware of her presence. And there, in the center of the chamber, sat the Eye of Amun, a crystalline sphere, pulsating with golden energy. Cleopatra reached out, and the moment her fingers brushed against it, time bent around her. She saw visions, worlds crumbling, empires reborn, armies kneeling before her. And then a whisper: "Your will shapes reality." With a grin, she turned to Lucien. "The world will remember my name again." But Qasim wasn't finished. His men opened fire. The bullets never reached her. With a mere thought, Cleopatra rewrote reality. The sand swallowed her enemies, the bullets melted mid-air, and the desert trembled under her newfound power. She laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. The world had forgotten Cleopatra, buried her under centuries of history. But now she held the power to shape it as she saw fit. She had conquered Rome once. Now she would conquer the world again. The queen had returned, and this time she was unstoppable. The world shifted as Cleopatra emerged from the ruins, the Eye of Amun glowing in her grasp. The desert sky burned crimson in the fading sunlight, as if the gods themselves watched in fear. Lucien followed closely behind, eyes wide with awe and terror. "We have to be careful with this kind of power, Celine." She turned to him, her golden eyes flashing. "Celine is dead. I am Cleopatra, queen of the two lands, ruler of what was and what will be." Lucien swallowed hard. He had spent years uncovering lost history, but never did he expect to stand beside a living legend. "We need a plan," he muttered. She smiled. "The plan is simple. The world bends to my will, or it burns." In Cairo, news of the tomb's disturbance had spread. The Order of Horus was furious. Elias Qasim had failed to stop her, but his superiors, powerful men in high places, would not sit idly by. Within hours, intelligence agencies, private military forces, and secret societies across the globe were alerted. Cleopatra wasn't just a historical curiosity anymore. She was a threat. Drones scanned the desert ruins, and satellite feeds locked onto her location. The US and Egyptian governments, unaware of the full truth, were mobilizing. But Cleopatra didn't run. She waited. And when the first strike team arrived, black-clad mercenaries armed with the best technology modern warfare could offer, she remade reality with a single whisper. Sand rose like a tidal wave, swallowing their weapons, their vehicles, their very breath. They screamed, their bodies aging 100 years in an instant. The ones who survived knelt before her, trembling. Swear loyalty and live, she commanded. One by one, they pledged themselves to the Queen of the Nile. Lucian stared at her. You're building an army. Cleopatra's smile was cold. No, Lucian. I am reclaiming what is mine. A week later, Cleopatra was no longer just a whispered rumor. She was a global crisis. World leaders scrambled to respond. Some dismissed her as a delusion. Others saw her as a new kind of power, one that could shift the very balance of civilization. And some, those who knew of the true history of Egypt, feared her return most of all. When she walked into the Egyptian presidential palace alone, the guards froze. She did not need an army to conquer. The president of Egypt stood before her, flanked by generals. What do you want? He asked, barely able to keep his voice steady. Cleopatra stepped forward, golden energy flickering around her fingertips. To rule. He laughed. The world is not ruled by pharaohs anymore. She tilted her head. Then perhaps it is time the world is reminded. And with a mere thought, the power of the Eye of Amun unraveled the laws of modern warfare. The Suez Canal twisted upon itself, swallowing ships whole. The Nile reversed its course, flooding the deserts and turning them into fertile lands. The statues of her ancestors stood tall again, rising from ruins. Cairo bowed. And Egypt was hers once more. The world had a choice. Kneel or perish. Europe trembled, the United Nations fractured. Countries feared her power, yet millions worshipped her as a goddess reborn. But Cleopatra was no mere goddess. She was a ruler. And her empire had only just begun. Egypt was hers. The world watched in stunned silence as the ancient kingdom reawakened under Cleopatra's rule. The Eye of Amun pulsed in her hand, reshaping reality at her will. In the span of 3 weeks, she had turned a struggling nation into the seat of a new empire. Crops flourished in once barren deserts. Her soldiers, once mortal men, now moved with the strength of legends. The pyramids, long worn by time, stood pristine once more, radiating an unnatural energy. But the world would not kneel so easily. In Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, leaders met behind closed doors. We're dealing with a living god, President Langley of the US muttered, rubbing his temples. And she's already reshaped an entire nation. If we wait any longer, it won't just be Egypt. She's coming for all of us, Russian Prime Minister Petrov growled. The question is, how do we stop her? Asked China's General Wu. The room was silent. Conventional weapons were useless. Satellites had recorded footage of Cleopatra turning a missile barrage into a flock of golden birds over Cairo. But then an old man, Dr. Elias Qasim, cleared his throat. There is a way, he whispered. We must take the Eye of Amun from her. Cleopatra had expected retaliation. She welcomed it. When the first wave of bombers crossed into Egyptian airspace, she reached out with her mind, and the sky itself rebelled. The air shimmered, turning into an impenetrable storm of golden sand and lightning. Planes vanished, swallowed by a force unseen since the time of the pharaohs. Then came the ground invasion. Thousands of soldiers from the world's most powerful armies marched into the Nile Delta. Cleopatra watched from her throne as tanks rolled toward her new capital. Lucian, standing beside her, looked uneasy. "This is the entire military strength of the modern world," he warned. "We should negotiate." She raised a hand, silencing him. "Negotiation is for the weak. Let them witness the power of a true ruler." With a single whisper, she unleashed the wrath of the old gods. The sands beneath the invaders shifted and roared, swallowing tanks whole. Statues of Anubis and Horus came to life, their stone bodies moving with inhuman speed, tearing through entire battalions. Then the pyramids opened, revealing hidden chambers pulsing with unnatural energy. From within, an army of the dead rose. Mummified warriors, clad in golden armor, surged forward, blades glowing with celestial fire. The world watched in horror as Cleopatra turned history itself into a weapon. By the time the battle ended, 2 million soldiers lay dead, not a single one from Cleopatra's side. The world had no choice. One by one, nations fell before her. The Middle East, Africa, and Southern Europe swore loyalty. Armies defected, their generals bending the knee before the Queen of the Nile. But not all had surrendered. The United States, Russia, and China had one last plan, and it was already in motion. Lucian had always been by her side. He had helped her uncover the Eye of Amun, helped her claim her throne. But now, as he stood before her in her throne room, his face was etched with sorrow. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And then he pulled out an ancient dagger, its blade covered in hieroglyphs. A weapon forged by the Order of Horus, designed to sever the bond between Cleopatra and the Eye. She gasped as the blade sank into her chest. The room shook. The Eye flickered, its golden light dimming. The power that had made her unstoppable began to unravel. Cleopatra stumbled, gripping her throne. Her vision blurred as she looked up at Lucian, her most loyal follower, her betrayer. "You dare," she hissed, blood dripping from her lips. Lucian's eyes were full of pain. "I loved you, but the world cannot belong to one person." And with that, he shattered the Eye of Amun. The explosion of power sent shockwaves across the earth. The sky turned black. The pyramids crumbled. And Cleopatra, the greatest ruler who had ever lived, fell into the abyss. When the dust settled, Egypt was gone, a wasteland of ruins and silence. The world took a breath, believing the nightmare was over. But deep beneath the sands, something stirred. A whisper. "Promise. I will return." And this time there would be no mercy.